super secret Department of Energy facilities, which I think it's crazy to say that hasn't happened. You're saying that it only happened with the Manhattan Project and it hasn't happened since. That's insane. There is black science, in my opinion. And I think what you're talking about is the reason why we'll need black AI and white side AI. Because if you just commercialize all of this stuff sort of willy-nilly, I mean, it just runs amok. And then what happens? Like, you probably need some like really impressive panel to be thinking. If OpenAI figures out some like new, insane, exciting unlock, you need to think through you need to game out all of the implications before you just let that out.
Can you even do that with a human mind?
It's a great, yeah.
So you have to bring the AI in to help you game for AI.
Oh, we're fucked.
We're fucked. That's what I'm saying. Because once it becomes sentient, right, and once it becomes autonomous and it can kind of make its own decisions, like that's kind of game over.
Yep.
And that's the race. We're running towards the cliff.
It's really scary. It's really scary.
But isn't that probably what we're here for? Like, let's take the most fantastic of all possible theories, which is that human beings were genetically engineered. Well, if you wanted to seed the cosmos with super intelligent life akin to what is visiting us, how would you manifest that? You would do it exactly how it's being done right now. And you would take human beings and you would essentially do the same thing that we did with wolves when we turned them into dogs.
Yep.
And if you look from the time the nuclear bomb was detonated, from the time of the Manhattan Project, look at what's happening to testosterone levels. Look at what's happening with microplastics, the endocrine disruptors. We're essentially weakening the human skeletal system and endocrine system. All our hormonals are all down. Our miscarriages are up. Birth rates are lower. We're moving towards in vitro fertilization. I was watching some guy on TV today, and he was on a panel, and he was explaining that our grandchildren are going to laugh at the idea of sexual procreation because no one's going to be doing that. Oh, you just took a chance with abnormalities and Down syndrome and all sorts of chromosomal issues. And why would you do that? Why would you have sex for babies when you can do it with in vitro fertilization and like...
Yeah, it's gonna be like that Pixar movie WALL-E, or like we're gonna be like in the fetal position, hooked up to the Borg or whatever.
We're probably all gonna look like the Greys.
Like the Grey. Well, that's a crazy. So there's actually a biological anthropologist at Montana Tech University. His name is Mike Masters, and I've seen you on your show talk about how aliens could be humans from the future. Yeah, and I agree. You've interviewed Dr. Shauna Swan. She talks about how sperm count is 59% per capita of what it was in 1973. Yeah. Insane. Testosterone's fallen off a cliff.
Right.
We are being a dog is to a wolf what we are to what a gray alien looks like.
Right.
They lose the melanin in their skin. That's what happens when you become domesticated. So there is a biological anthropologist named Mike Masters who literally wrote a whole book, and he goes deep into all of the abductions. Like, he'll talk about Travis Walton, and he'll talk about Betty and Barney Hill, and he'll be like, this is why these are beings from the future that are coming back into time. And in many cases, abductees have to undergo chemical rinses as to not infect the future with a foreign pathogen. Tissue samples, genetic samples, or...
is it the future, or are we dealing with beings that have gone through this already and are at another stage? Not us in the future, but they're more advanced. Like, maybe they live in a solar system where whatever planet they're on doesn't have the same amount of near-Earth objects that cause impacts and reset civilization every 12,000 years or whatever the fuck happens here.
That's possible, but then we would have to be sort of an A/B test, because if you think about the atmospheric conditions on Earth, the likelihood of evolutionary convergence to look like a hominid being, that's bipedal or whatever, is extremely low.
But is it? Because what if that's what all solar systems are? Terrence Howard, who's a very weird guy.
Love him.
Fascinating thinker. Eric kind of exposed that he's not really educated in some different things that he talks about, and Eric was like, you got to stop teaching. Like, you're one of us, you're a brilliant guy, but you need to be like classically educated on this stuff, really understand what you're talking about. But he had this really fascinating idea about planets. And he thinks that planets, as they get a specific distance from the sun, then they're capable of supporting life. And that all of them get to the same stage. And then a planet is essentially peopling. And then as the planets move further and further from the sun, they have to adapt advanced technology in order to stabilize their atmosphere, in order to sustain life in this new harsh environment where they're not protected in the Goldilocks zone anymore. And he thinks that planets are formed from excretions from the sun. And as they move further and further from the sun, they become habitable, and then less habitable, and then uninhabitable. And we're kind of finding that out about Mars.
Yeah.
Which is the Mars is a weird one.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's the remote viewers that went like a billion years in the past of Mars and saw advanced civilizations. And now we're finding structures on Mars, like that square that they found on Mars.
It's crazy.
Which is hundreds of meters across at the very least, maybe larger, verified, right angles, 4 of them. Impossible to exist in nature in that form. It looks like walls.
Yeah.
It looks like 4 square walls. Like the Cydonia thing is really weird. The face on Mars is weird, but maybe just kind of weird that, you know, sometimes, you know, the side of a mountain looks like someone's face, but it's not really someone's face. It's just, you know, once in a lifetime sort of. But the square,
Yeah.
that fucking pull that image up of that square on Mars. The square is fucking bananas. Like, what's that?
It's so nuts.
That really looks like a fucking building.
That looks like a building.
Like the base of a building, you know, a million years later or whatever the hell it is.
And even conventional astronomers will say that Mars had a biosphere at some point, and it was possibly stripped of its magnetosphere. And I don't know if you remember this, but in the mid-90s, Clinton gave a speech because a meteorite called ALH 840001, which had polycyclic hydrocarbons on it. It had like little bacterial fossils on it. He gave a speech being like, you know, maybe there was life on Mars, you know, due to this. This is pretty crazy. I interviewed actually a guy named John Brandenburg, who's a PhD. He's worked at Sandia National Labs. He's worked at Lawrence Livermore, like incredibly smart guy. He talks about the existence of xenon 129 and argon 40, these specific nuclear isotopes, existing on Mars in excess of what you would find with just a normal sort of cataclysm. And so he thinks there was sort of this nuclear holocaust on Mars. And then, you have Joseph McMoneagle, who's remote viewer #1. You've had Hal Puthoff on, who ran the Stargate program. Joseph McMoneagle was the #1 remote viewer in that program. I've interviewed him. I don't know who tasked him, but in the 90s, the CIA tasked him with remote viewing Mars 1 million years ago. And he claimed to have remote viewed hominid-like creatures, but they were like 12 to 14 feet tall, walking around, pyramidal structures. I don't know, very strange. And then you get into like crazier territory. You know, Richard Hoagland had all these pictures of structures on Mars, and like, I don't know how much weight to put in that.
Hoagland did a lot of weird leaps, though. I've watched
tons.
Yeah.
Tons. But I think the people that say like 0% there was life on Mars, they're crazy. I mean, there are water caverns all over Mars. That is a fact. Yeah. So you have to be dogmatic to say that there wasn't life at some point. You know, I'm not saying, you have to think probabilistically, right? So it's like some percentage possibly real. On the Terrence Howard stuff, I see zero evidence for that. I mean, I have no idea. But that would point to maybe, like, I would believe that if like our whole universe is sort of information theoretic. So like you have, you know, John Wheeler, you know, famous physicist from Princeton, you know, saying we live in this sort of observer-dependent universe. He talks about like the anthropic principle, like where Planck's constant, we're slightly different. The Earth's atmosphere, wouldn't exist as is. And, you know, another example is like hydrogen and oxygen bond to form these perfect crystal structures where the solid form of it, so ice, is less dense than the liquid form of it, which never happens. That's just because of these perfect crystal structures. And if that weren't the case, the Earth would flood like a million times over. You know, the Earth is mostly water, right? So you have all these sort of like Goldilocks, you know, elements of the Earth that could point towards the Earth has been tried in a bajillion iterations, and we just got really lucky. It's like the Elon thing. We are the little flaming candle and, in this vast cosmos that is conscious, and we are extremely lucky. Or that could point to the Earth being simulated.
Right.
And so, so then maybe Terrence Howard is right. If the Earth is simulated, there are probably A/B tests going on, just like in computer science.
And then there's the moon.
And then the moon's weird too.
The moon's really weird.
The moon's super weird.
The size of the moon directly corresponding, like when it's in orbit with the sun, completely blocks out the sun perfectly.
It's 1/400th the size of the sun, and it's 400 times closer to the Earth than the sun. You never see the dark side, which is very weird. It's actually, I believe it's closer to the Earth than what you would normally expect for a moon.
And it's huge.
It's huge. You have cultures actually talking about a pre-moon period, and it's stabilizing the climate. You have the Zulu cultures talking about this. And then here's the weirdest stuff about the moon. Apollo 11, I believe, when the booster took off on the moon, they were like, we think it might be hollow, and it's it seems like actually the outer layer of the moon is less dense, is more dense than lower layers, which pattern matches only to an excavation site. That's obviously in Earth, the lower you go, it's more dense, right? And so Apollo 12, they intentionally crashed the booster of the lunar vehicle onto the moon. They put seismometers there, and they said that it rang like a bell. This is all fact. You could look all of this stuff. It's super weird.
It is really weird. I know you did an episode about that with Randall Carlson.
Love Randall Carlson.
Yeah, he's got some wild fucking theories too. But the idea that the moon was somehow another place there to stabilize our atmosphere is so crazy.
It is crazy. And then you obviously have to sort of think in probabilities all the way down. Lowest probability, craziest thing is Ingo Swann, who is another remote viewer in the Stargate program. He wrote a book called Penetration, where he's basically like abducted by this guy in a suit, like this kind of Men in Black style guy named Axelrod, and he is told to remote view the moon, and he remote views an alien base on the moon. And he says that he gets it. The whole thing goes crazy. I mean, the book is insane. It's like he then ends up in a supermarket, and he says that he senses that this woman at the produce aisle is like an alien or something. But a lot of people from that Stargate program remote viewed, structures on the dark side of the moon and that sort of thing. So,
well, but AJ from the Y-Files was on, and he was the one that was telling us that there's photos, right, of the dark side of the moon. That someone had seen photos and was assuming that these would be released shortly, that there were structures. Wow, this is going to be the biggest news ever, and then it was never released.
Are you talking about maybe Carl Wolf?
Is that what it was?
Who was taken to, this is all his claims, and he died in a freakish bike accident a little after saying this. But he said that there was like in like Langley, Virginia, where a lot of spooky stuff goes on. He was taken to some it was like inside a mountain complex, which we definitely, Carl Wolf, yeah.
That guy bikes?
Yeah, apparently not enough. But
that guy could die any time.
Oh, man.
On a scooter. So, photographs of the 1966 lunar orbiter mission that revealed large base of the moon. Can we hear what he's saying? Just hear a little bit of it.
Scan one section of the moon, then another and another, and then they would get a larger image. So this mosaic then would be put in that contact printer, and that was then a print that was issued to whomever, the press, the scientist, whatever, wherever that was intended to go. So he was showing me how all this worked, and we walked over to one side of the lab, and he said, by the way, we've discovered a base on the back side of the moon. And I said, whose? What do you mean, whose? He said, yes, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And at that point, I became frightened, and I was a little terrified, thinking to myself that if anybody walks in the room now, I know we're in jeopardy, we're in trouble, because he shouldn't be giving me this information. I was fascinated by it, but I also knew that he was overstepping a boundary that he shouldn't be stepping over. And then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometric shapes. There were towers, there were spherical buildings. There were very tall towers and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. So I didn't say any more to him because I was concerned again that somebody was going to come in at any moment, would catch us having this conversation, and we would be in real trouble. I realized that he was telling me this information because he didn't have anybody else to talk to. Now, probably in that laboratory, he was probably one of the few enlisted people, and he was a worker bee. And he had a high-level security clearance, obviously, but he couldn't share that information with anybody else. And in those days, we didn't. When you had your security clearance, you took it seriously. It isn't like today where people don't take these things seriously. We had a different set of morals and ethics and values. That's the way we were raised, and we stayed bound by those agreements. So it was rare that someone would do something like this, but this fellow and I were the same rank. I think he was very distressed. He had the same pallor and demeanor as the scientists outside the room. They were just as concerned as he was, and he needed to discuss it with somebody. So that was the end of it right there. I didn't take it any further than that. I just filed it away. But the interesting thing, every day that I went home, I would think to myself, I can't wait to hear about this on the news, And, so I'd turn on the TV and I'd look at the news to see if they're going to announce, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon, being really naive, And of course, here it is 30-some years later, and we still haven't heard about it.
Whoa.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah, but then there's the question of disinformation, right? Like, you could conceivably give people a bunch of nonsense and tell them about it, knowing that some of it is going to leak, and it's going to and it won't be verified, and it's going to make this whole story seem even more ridiculous and make people less likely or reluctant to study it.
Totally. And in his case, he says that he was in this, mountain base or whatever, where all of the world's nations were working together as part of some collegial UN style space program or whatever. So that to me might be a little, beyond the pale. And I'm glad you made that point, because that is ufology 101. And I've heard you be incredibly exhausted and frustrated at UFO disclosure. And I think that is the reasonable response. It is limited hangouts on limited hangouts. It's just, we're going to give you a little bit, but we're also going to sprinkle in some falsities and some bullshit. We're going to stigmatize it. And it kind of works because it creates this initiation path for recruiting, if there are any of these programs. It widens the surface area. It both conditions the populace, but also stigmatizes the thing and makes it seem like kind of a joke. And so I think if you are not viewing modern disclosure through that kind of hermeneutic lens of interpretation, and you were just taking it, accepting it, imbibing it wholheartedly, prima facie, I think you are in trouble.